I'm just going to briefly introduce you, and then we will go into my first question, and then hopefully everyone has lots of questions for Raj, and you can come up on stage and ask him yourself. So, yeah. So Raj is an award-winning activist and New York Times best-selling writer. He's testified to the UK, the US, and EU governments on food and hunger, and his book on the food system, Stuffed and Starved, has been translated into a dozen languages. He's worked for the World Bank and the WTO, and has been tear-gassed on 4 continents protesting against them. His academic career spans Oxford, LSE, Cornell, and UC Berkeley, and he's currently a research professor at the University of Texas. But how are you this evening, Raj?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm in Texas, or the sphincter of the beast. But other than that, I'm doing fine.
Good. Are you showing the film at South by Southwest? Has it already happened?
Screening tomorrow. That's right. Yeah.
Cool. That's great. Okay. Well, we're a bit pushed for time. Well, not pushed for time, but we don't have a super long time, so I'm just going to start. But one of the things that I like the most about the film is that the narrator and protagonist, Anita, is someone who's on the front lines of climate change, but is shown to have agency as opposed to being a passive victim. And I just wondered if you could tell us how this became the focus of the film, and when did you know that you wanted Anita to be the person who told the story?
Well, I mean, we always knew that there was something wrong with the way that documentaries about the food system worked, because, I was a talking head in a few of them, and it was always, lights up on working class communities of people of color suffering. And then there would be someone like me or Vandana Shiva saying, yes, the poor have it tough. And then, the cadence would shift a little bit, and we'd have sort of jangly guitar music and, farmers markets and white people buying kale. And, we'd be told that by the end of it, if we have just enough tote bags and metal straws, everything's going to be fine. And that sort of model of thinking that you can fix climate change just through a certain kind of deracinated ethical consumption was always something we knew was a problem. But for us in this film, it was clear that Anita was going to be the person leading the story pretty much when we started casting, when we were sort of introducing ourselves to the community. What happened was I was there with Steve James, one of the great American documentary filmmakers. He did a film called Hoop Dreams, among many others. And I was at the front of the room saying, hello, we're here from the left, from America. We're here to tell your story in a very respectful way. And everyone's like, yes, well done. You're here to tell us the story. I told her in a very respectful way. And then there were 3 women at the back who were just throwing shade on everyone, including me. And Steve's camera kind of went to them. And Steve was like, no, they're the people who aren't the sort of true believers, but who have enough spine to be able to sort of just, throw shit back at you, Raj. And so that's when we knew that it was going to be her story. And then on top of that, we realized through the arc of it that it had to be her narrating it as well. We had to figure out new protocols for doing that, because in the editing room, I was doing the worst kind of sort of David Attenborough style thing of like, and here we are among the Malawians. And if you listen very closely, you can hear them fight patriarchy. And that was rubbish as well. So in the end, our attempts to have anyone except Anita narrate were just sort of flayed away by the obvious irony of here's a film about mansplaining, and if anyone other than her was doing it, we'd be doing that. It took 10 years though of reconfiguring the film in different ways to really recognize A, that we were part of the problem, but B, the solution was to give away as much power as we could.
Thank you so much. I have loads and loads of questions that I think I could ask you, but I do want to give other people a chance to come up. Has anyone thought of a question, and would they like to? I can ask more, but if anyone wants to. Or you can say your question to me and I can say it if you'd rather. Okay, you guys can keep thinking and I'll ask the next one. So I was watching an interview with you earlier as well, Raj, and you were saying that, and I think we saw in the film how Esther was talking about how people shouldn't feel guilty about climate change and the things that we're doing, but as it isn't helpful. And in the interview I saw, you were talking about how pity isn't a useful emotion when you're trying to be an activist and trying to change things, and how denial, even though we think of that as something very negative, can actually be a much more positive place to start from. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. The hard part of this film was discovering that, for example, when the Jackson family had this interaction with Anita and Esther, I mean, Anita and Esther recognized pity as the useless emotion that it was fairly early on. I mean, you know, us behind the camera, we were like, well, maybe they'll change, maybe they'll, you know, they'll come to Jesus. But it turns out that that was not the right phrase nor the thing to hope for, because pity doesn't get you anywhere. It's the end of the conversation, because once you've been pitied, there's no appeal to anyone's reason or to some sort of idea that we are in fact not worth pitying, but we are the same, you know, we're in the same boat, and pity doesn't fix the hole in the boat. But you know, so in the discussion that we were having, you know, Esther was saying, and in the film you hear Esther say that change begins with denial. And I think that it's important to recognize how honestly she comes by that realization, because she's been dealing with denial since the 1990s. In the 1990s, she was a healthcare worker in a time of widespread denialism around AIDS. In the, you know, the first decade of this century, she was in denialism around patriarchy, and now she's fighting denialism around climate change. And she understands why denial is useful in the same way that, you know, the sort of bumper sticker understanding of often attributed to Gandhi explains how change works, because first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And if they're fighting you, that's the denial stage. And so while you're in the middle of it, it's uncomfortable and it's frustrating. But it means that a whole bunch of things have happened already, so that your point of view has moved from being ignorable to being laughable to now being actually dangerous to those in power. And now comes the hard part, where, you know, the last stage of the hard part, where you actually have to put in place new kinds of ideas and policies and visions so that you win. And yeah, I mean, I'm living through that now here in Texas, where, you know, for the longest time, Texas was just in complete denial about the fact that this is an incredibly racist state. It was a state that fought for slavery not once, but twice. And now it's seditious and illegal to teach that. But that's great, because now at least, you know, the truth about this sort of white supremacist state is at least in people's faces, to the extent that those who feel sufficiently awkward and empowered to smack that down are doing it. Now all we have to do is stop that, and we can actually get the truth to the surface. Now, you know, is that reparations? No, it's far from reparations, but at least we're on the trajectory where they're in denial, and that it's taken, you know, it's taken decades of really hard work to get here. And you know, after this denial, I'm sure there will be many more, but it's a sign that you're on the way to winning.
Thank you for that. I'm sure we all find that very uplifting. I've got more questions, but does anyone? Yes, would you like to come up and ask one?
Thank you.
We've got a question coming up, Raj.
Thank you for being brave. Hello.
Here we go.
Yeah. Is that okay? Can you hear me, Raj?
Yeah, I can.
Over there, yeah. Hi, thank you very much. That was a really amazing film. It's the second time I've seen it, and it struck me a lot more that time, and I definitely got a lot more out of it on second viewing. But I wanted to ask what the sort of process was in terms of engaging with that community to kind of go and film them, and the women that you did kind of eventually go to America with, what their sort of reaction was when you initially approached them, and how you kind of weave that into your own kind of filmmaking as well. And like, just kind of curious to know what their, I guess, reaction was when you kind of broached them about the topic of climate change and how they responded.
Well, thanks so much for the question, and thanks for seeing it twice. That I'm very grateful, and grateful that it resonated yet more the second time around. That's a win. But in terms of the work, I mean, I went to graduate school with one of the co-founders of Soils, Food and Healthy Communities. I've been following it since the late 90s when it began. And then when I was living in South Africa, I went up to Malawi to see it in action in the early 2000s. So I've been engaged with Soils, Food and Healthy Communities since then, and I've done some academic research with them. And every time I went up there, I was like, well, people need to know that this is a thing that, despite the rubbish about, sort of the Bob Geldorfian view of just sending money, crooning and sending money over from rich countries to poor countries and then crossing your fingers. There were actually some very good ideas in Africa about ending hunger. And it's by people who know very well when Christmas time is. So the idea of this, that Africa is a sort of pathetic place where all they're waiting for is the right kind of international aid was something that just I was very keen to get out into the world. I mean, and that's why I do writing. I mean, I'm not naturally inclined to write books, but the stuff that I write about because no one else is saying it and no one else knows about it. So that was the process with the film. I mean, I didn't want to be a filmmaker, and I'm not particularly, I don't know that I will make another film because I'm not seeing any other story that needs to be told that I'm in a particularly good position to tell. But this was just something that emerged through discussion with the leaders at Soils, Food and Healthy Communities. So Esther, for example, one of the other co-founders, was on board with the idea of me making a documentary, years before we ever picked up a camera. And so it was only in 2011 when we started doing it in earnest that then we had to sort of spend some time working with Anita to build up trust, because I didn't know Anita. I hadn't met her before. But when we kept going back and we kept filming, and it was Soils, Food and Healthy Communities who had worked with Anita, workshopping ideas around climate change. And it was through Esther and Rachel Besner-Kerr was the other person who founded SFHC, told me, well, Anita was just livid and gobsmacked when she found out that climate change was being driven by America and we were doing nothing about it. And she said, do you want me to come to America? So what we did, and you heard me stutter it on camera before, was just say, well, look, if there was an opportunity for you to come, would you be open to it? And then it took a couple of years when, following her saying yes, for us to realize we couldn't raise money for it. And so we had to put it on our credit cards. And then we organized something, and we just brought her over for as long as we could with Esther as a translator and comrade and guide. And then, it took another 2-3 years to actually sort of finish the making of the film. So all along the way, there's been a sort of engagement and a partnership and an honesty. And, it's not like I'm walking away from SFHC. I mean, I'm continuing to work with them and continuing to do research with SFHC, and I will until I die. I mean, this is just one of the, this is a sort of long-term project for me. But we were very conscious about the way that documentary filmmakers can engage in a sort of smash and grab approach to storytelling, where they sort of drive by and say, oh, that's nice, we're going to tell that story, and then bugger off. And we're doing absolutely everything we can to do the opposite of that. So, we've got long-term accountability in place. We went back and screened and rescreened different cuts. But Zak and I recorded the voiceover with Anita through really painstaking sitting down, screening little bits of the film, having long discussions about it, and then condensing that into a few words that, Anita was like, that this is the right way to phrase what I feel about this, this moment. So we did all that just as COVID was breaking. In fact, we both got COVID on the way back. But the journey of the film was one where we were very, careful to be conscious of our relationships of power with respect to Anita and the rest of the community, to the extent that, we were worried about putting the marriage abduction scene in. And we wrote out and we had translated, and we just so many different things to Anita saying, are you sure you want this marriage abduction scene to be in the film? Like, this is going to be seen by a lot of people. And in the end, I think she just got pissed off with us. She said, look, how many times do I have to tell you? I want this in the film, because if it's not there, people will never know that it can end. So all of this is to say, I feel like we went out of our way to make sure that we weren't exploitative. And certainly, in terms of paying the community for the music you heard at the end, we did that at commercial rates. and we'll continue to fund that community through this film for as long as it screens.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Ben says thank you too.
Thank you, Ben.
Does anyone else want to come up here and ask a question? Or I totally yes? Oh, brilliant. Come up.
Thank you.
It seems a bit weird that he's here. Hi, Raj.
Hello.
Hi, I'm just wondering how you managed to weave the kind of cultural stuff in. You know, the documentary is about climate change, but you managed to weave in the stuff around the relationships with the people locally, the marriage, how women were treated in those relationships. I've a bit of experience of being in Malawi. I'm going there in 4 weeks, and I was really interested to come tonight. But how did you manage to get that kind of sub-issue in there along with the climate change?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Sorry, my name's Janet.
Janet, thank you so much. And I'm so excited that you're going to Malawi. This is, and hopefully up there to the Scottish Presbyterian Church in Ekwendeni. But the relationships around, the understanding about patriarchy was something that this organization has come to by itself. I didn't have to do anything. It was already part of the way that the group was thinking about ending child malnutrition, because child malnutrition, as you heard Anita say, is not just an absence of food, and is very rarely actually an absence of food in the community. It's also about relationships of power around, bad ideas around breastfeeding, around patriarchy. And all of that was something that they were unpicking themselves through the first decade of this century, so that by the time we started rolling the camera, it was well known that, in fact, in order to end hunger, you not only needed to farm agroecologically, but you also, as part of that agroecology, needed to reconfigure relationships of power in the home. So we knew that we had to shoot for that because the community had already made plain that this was part of its strategy to end hunger. And that's also why we were so keen to film there, is because thinking that you can end hunger just by making more food is horribly misguided and misunderstands what hunger is. I mean, hunger isn't about a shortage of food, it's about an absence of power. And that's why this story was so compelling. And then when we came to the United States, it was easy to see all of that as well, because if hunger is an absence of power, then the contours of inequalities in power are always there to see. I mean, it's only in a sociology textbook that we do race one week and then gender another week and then class another week and then colonialism another week. In the real world, it happens every day all together. And if the camera's rolling, you'll be able to catch that, and particularly if you're looking for it, and if the community is aware of it already, as they are in Detroit, or they are in Maryland, or as they are in a range of places, you'll be able to see that fairly plainly. And so we were lucky in being guided by the wisdom of the communities in Malawi, and then knowing that there were some equally smart communities here in the US that were that were tackling these inequities in power as well. Have a great trip, Janet. Fly safely.
Thank you. And Janet says thank you too. And yes, I remember doing sociology at uni and having a module on gender and a module on race. So I think your film brought those together so beautifully, and how they are wrapped up in climate change. Does anyone else want to? You can put up a hand if you don't want to. Yes, do you want to come up?
Hello, I'm Georgie.
Hi, Georgie.
Thank you so much for the film. Yeah, really eye-opening. I think one of the best things I got from it was actually some people's minds being changed at the end, and obviously seeing some people's minds aren't changed. But from the film overall, I kind of got that there was like two avenues you're going down, and one was like systemic change, and one was sort of on individuals. I just wondered if you personally have sort of a foresight, or like can see which avenue would be the preferred route to go down to induce kind of meaningful change? Is it through grassroots communities and people individually, or is it through kind of the big fat system that we're fighting against? That's quite a hard question, sorry.
No, Georgia, actually, thank you so much for that question. I mean, I think the answer is it's both. I mean, what we're going for here is, I mean, for example, I will be fighting the patriarchy that I've been raised with, you know, flaying it out of me for the rest of my life. And that's just the work of liberation, and that's just the work I have to do. And that's, you know, I don't need a pat on the back for that. I need, in fact, to be it's part of a sort of process of atonement. But it's happening at the individual level because it's, you know, it's only me who can do that for me. But I can't do it alone. I have to do it together. And that's the story here, that while capitalism operates through, you know, through individual acts, you have to change the system so that these individual acts are harder to do and become as appalling to us as in fact they you know, in truth are. So, you know, the change that you see in Winston, for example, is not a sort of lifestyle choice. I think that framing it as a lifestyle choice takes away from not only his journey, but also that of those of the women around him and men in the community who have taken, you know, who have pointed out that patriarchy is not okay and have developed new ways of living in opposition to it. And similarly, you know, where you see Jordan Jameson at the end of the film realizing that, you know, people are undone by ignorance or destroyed by a lack of knowledge, I think he says, that's part of a bigger change that he came to not just by himself, but with a community helping him understand that the old ways were bad. So I think, you know, we all have individual work to do, but that comes under the umbrella of confronting colonialism and white supremacy and, you know, the debt that we in the global North owe the global South. Yes, there's some individual stuff that we have to do, but there's also some collective work that we can and should be doing, you know, in lockstep with that. So as we transform rather radically the world in which we're in to become one that is consonant with the survival of the planet. You know, there is some stuff that we can do, and I don't mean just, you know, the metal straw stuff, but, you know, thinking more radically about how it is that we organize together. That's individuals organizing together, but for the big systemic change. And I'm not convinced that there is any individual change that will assure the future of our planet if we all just, you know, shop differently. But the good news is that we don't, you know, big change happens not through shopping, but through organizing. And that's the only way anything big has ever happened in human history. And that's, you know, that's our task ahead. But that's, again, what Anita and Esther have asked of us. They say, you know, become activists for climate change. They haven't filled what it is, you know, that demand with specific requests, because that's our job. We have to figure out what is required, what we can do, what we're best placed to be able to affect. But that's the work ahead. And, you know, individually we will come together and we will become activists for climate change so that we can at least make a little bit more manageable the apocalypse that's already upon us.
Thank you so much. And thank you from Georgie. Would anyone else like to? Yes, come up.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Corin. Just a similar vein to the whole individual change. There's a lot of personal growth throughout the whole thing, but were you at all disappointed by some of the reactions towards the end of those people in America and how perhaps they were still in denial, or do you think there was sufficient justification for that?
Oh, Corinne, that's a great question. I mean, I understand why they're caught in the worlds that they are, and it frustrates me. And I don't think that there's a good. I don't think there's a good reason to be a climate skeptic. But I think that there are some bad ones, and there are plenty of bad reasons for, you know, why society looks the way that it does, painted across the world at the moment. But certainly in the United States, I mean, when you go to the Jacksons' farm, they don't present as the enemy. They're organic farmers who love their kid, who love their son Eli so deeply that they changed everything about their life, and they took a pay cut. And the reason that that Ed works at a coal-fired power station is because it's the only place in this shitty country where you can get good healthcare. And so, if we had the NHS there, he wouldn't be working at a coal-fired power station. In fact, in the end, this family makes the choice to just put all that behind them and go sell the farm and just go ranching in Missouri, I think. But that doesn't change their approach to thinking about climate change in any dramatic way, because it's so hard for them in their community and with the sort of political resources near them to grok what it might be like to engage in a process of reparations. And that means that there's a lot of organizing still to do here in the United States. And I think that one of the things here in America that people say is that often it's very rare to see people like the Jacksons on telly here. Even the worlds of filmmaking and documentary are so segregated that even those kinds of gentle Republicans are not often given space on screen to stick their to sort of plant their flag, as it were. So I'm always saddened by people who don't get it. I'm saddened by people who see their futures more aligned with the right than the left. But I've got family members who are Hindu fascists. I have family members who are more of the right than they are of the left, and who don't give a fuck about climate change. And so it's not just Americans where you'll find that. There's plenty of people like that in Britain, and in my own family. But am I disappointed about that? Of course I am, and I'm angry about it, and I struggle to figure out ways of communicating with them in ways that they'll hear. Because my initial reaction is always to throw toys, but that's why I made this film, and that's why part of the outreach for this film doesn't involve me, but involves, for example, here in the US, a sort of roadshow in churches, and it comes with a Bible study, and it comes with curriculum to help folk move from a kind of dismissive view of Africa as a place where people have bones in their noses through a kind of education around race and around climate change and around the histories of colonialism, so that after 4 weeks you have the people who are initially in denial becoming people who are leaders in trying to, first of all, fundraise for stuff happening in Africa, but also starting to ask difficult questions about whether they need 2 very large SUVs and whether they need to be thinking about engaging in other kinds of change. So that stuff's happening. But I think this film was always intended to be something that engages in a world of organizing, and insofar as there are movements to help persuade people, that's the goal. Because it would be wrong to say I was disappointed to find an America like that, because we all know it exists. But still, the hard part is, how do I talk to my mom and dad about climate change in a way that doesn't send them or me off the deep end? But that's some personal stuff I got to work through.
Thank you so much. I definitely, I shared your feelings of disappointment, but I think one thing I did like about that storyline was that it challenged my ideas of why people are organic farmers or who are organic farmers. To hear someone say that they farm organically not because of climate change was strange, but I think it's great to see some of these gray areas.
Swear to God, though, there are people that Rosanna, I'm so pleased you mentioned that, because it was, it's very interesting here in the States that there is this organic, there's a in the Venn diagram of organic farming and vaccine denialism, there's quite a lot of overlap, more than you would think, because and I mean, you can see this in the UK as well, but to a lesser extent. The idea of organic is not about a certain solidarity with the planet or with the farm workers who are disproportionately exposed to pesticides. The reason you go organic is a very selfish and individualist one, because your body is a temple, and fuck the chemical companies. So you don't want their vicious poisons entering your body in the same way that you don't want Bill Gates's chip entering your body. And the logic is exactly the same. So, I've had some really very, again, me throwing toys conversations with people on the left who, people who I thought were comrades, but turns out are just selfish bastards who don't eat chemicals. And it's very interesting, again, the overlap and the history with that and communities of people of color. Here in the US, I'm much more sympathetic to that because white people bearing needles have generally not been up to any good in communities of people of color. But when you layer that with the individualism and the sort of selfishness, it's been a really interesting kind of, this film, and recognizing that, people come into organic for precisely these sort of selfish bastard reasons, was eye-opening to me. But it then made sense when all these people started crawling out of the woodwork saying that, champions of organic food saying that the vaccine was death. That alignment became a bit clearer.
Yes, I had a similar experience because I actually went woofing in Dorset last summer and I met a surprising amount of anti-vaxxers, but I'm not sure if I should be saying that. But does anyone else want to come up and ask a question? I think we've got time for at least one more. Yeah, do you want to come up?
Hi, my name's Amanda. I really enjoyed the film. Thank you for that, for giving us that opportunity to see a different world, as they say in it. I was just curious. Well, I was frustrated to see, not surprised to see the government in America didn't want to speak to Anita and yourselves. But I just kind of was curious about what their responses were when you tried to contact them. And also, I guess, your thoughts on the whole problem that we have with, like there's a severe lack of people from the Global South at COP26 and similar events. So yeah, how can we change that? Because these are the people who we really need to hear from. Yeah, I don't know if that's a question, but yeah.
No, it is, Amanda. Thank you. It's, I mean, the US government, we filmed under the Trump administration, so I think the emails were more or less. Unfortunately, no one is available to meet you in the time that you're in DC. More frustrating was the Gates Foundation, where they make such a song and dance about how they're going to transform African agriculture. We wanted to talk to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, no, we'll be very excited to talk to you." And there's a little clip of something there where you see Anita looking at that whole bowl of clam chowder. Well, we filmed that near the Gates Foundation headquarters. But by the time we got there, they're like, "Oh, awfully sorry. We're so sorry we couldn't make it out and make it work this time around. But next time you're in America, do look us up." So they were royal pains in the ass. And then the Pepsi company, we tried to talk to anyone. We tried to talk to loads of, we tried to talk to Monsanto. We tried to talk to large-scale farmers. We were trying to talk to just everyone who was in a position to make change. And the Pepsi company even, said, "Well, why don't you come out and we'll do a pre-interview and see if there's a fit." And so, at great expense, I went out there with a crew, and then they decided, nah, they're not interested. But I think all of this is a way of saying that they understand Anita's theory of change, which is if you go to someone's doorstep with your problem, they won't be able to ignore you. And so preventing us from getting to their doorstep is part of the strategy here. And that was certainly, would certainly seem to have been the UK strategy at COP26. And they said, well, it's because of COVID, without mentioning that, of course, the UK and a range of other countries wouldn't waive patents for the vaccine to get it into the global south, so they couldn't get the bloody vaccine in time, so they couldn't come. And they were like, "Oh, we're so sorry that we'll get to you in the global south with a vaccine at some point, we promise, but not today." And again, I mean, this is part of the sort of structural I mean, it's not just racism, but it's just the sort of the operation of global capitalism that will seek to turn to blame the global South without ever recognizing how it is that the global South is a survivor of the operations of power in the global North. One of the things that we're excited about with this project, though, is that there will in future be more storytelling coming from the global South, and also that this film is circulating not just to school people in the global North, but also as a kind of a card of solidarity. So it's touring around farmers' movements in the global South, and it's in a lot of languages that farmers' movements are finding useful to be able to watch it in and then make and discuss on their own. So I'm with you in thinking, yes, we need more representation from the global South in the global North, but folk in the global South are not waiting another 600 years for the global North to get its shit together and stop with the colonialism. There are these South-South exchanges that are fruitful, and I think it's up to us in the global North to actually wake up a little bit and clear the space and rein ourselves in, so that there is more of a platform for folk in the global South, so that we don't have to sort of send folk like me down there, but in fact we can be much more open to the intellectual life and the cultural life happening in the global South.
Thank you. I think that's a really great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us, Raj, and best of luck for the ongoing success of the film. And hopefully everyone who's been here tonight will talk to their friends and their family about the film, and more people will come and watch it. But thank you to the Glasgow Science Centre for hosting us this evening, and to all the staff that made it possible. And our next Climate Festival event is on the 23rd of March. It's a climate festival forum on greening your events, specifically aimed at communities holding events. And if you've missed out on any of our other Climate Festival events, they're on YouTube, and I will send out links to all of them tomorrow. So thank you so much for coming this evening, and thank you, Raj, and thank you for your amazing questions. So good night.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Rachel. Thank you, everyone.
Just leave this.